coming to our presentation. We are Team Nirvana, part of Team Saddle North, and we decided to do the mental health effects of COVID-19 on students, parents, and teachers. Some of the team members are Sandra, Alexander, Yesenia, Gina, Sonia, Cassidy, Carolina, Paula, Eilish, Sarah, Kevin, and Jasmine. And our supervisor is the amazing Valerie. What is mental health? According to the World Health Organization, mental health is a state of well being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. It also goes on to say that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Mental health is essential for each person. It gives us the ability to think, emote, interact with each other, earn a living, and enjoy life. I think something that is important to take away from this is that you don't have to have a mental disorder or disability to have a mental health problem. I think that is definitely true. Since the start of this pandemic, I haven't felt like myself, and it's been hard to find ways to kind of relieve my stress or kind of just take my mind away from whatever is going on. I used to go play basketball or go to the gym just to kind of get away, but now we can't really do that. So it's been hard to find a different way to kind of clear my mind. Um, but during this pandemic, there have been a lot of groups that have been affected by this, and we chose to focus on students, parents, and teachers. How the pandemic affects students. COVID has had many effects on students, but these are the four that we chose to focus on today. Food struggles, depression and substance abuse, struggles with remote learning, and safe space. Food struggles. According to a survey done by the mothers of young children, 40.9% of mothers with children ages 12 and under reported household food insecurity since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that same survey, there were mothers who stated that the children in my household were not eating enough because we just couldn't afford enough food. And others reported that it was often the case that their children were not eating enough due to the lack of resources since the coronavirus pandemic first began. And in a different survey called the COVID Impact Survey, they asked the question, the food we bought didn't last, and found that 34.5% of households with children 18 and under were food insecure as of late April 2020. And I think a big part of that had to do with the schools being closed down. Um, a lot of the time, school was the only way that students were getting more than one nutritious meal a day for 5 days out of the week. And according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, more than 2.4 billion breakfasts were served in 2019, and 85% of those were served to students on free or reduced meals. And the number of lunches doubled that with 5 billion served, and more than three-quarters of those were served to students on free or reduced meals. And I know a lot of school districts were still doing free meals, but you had to come pick them up. And if your family didn't have a car and relied on public transportation, it's just, harder to get food if you can't get there or have to rely on somebody else. And another thing that I think played a big factor in this was during the stay-at-home orders when everyone was panic buying and hoarding everything. They were buying all the cheap stuff, like all the cheap canned foods were gone, and instead of paying 80 cents for a can of black beans, had to pay $2 for organic black beans, and a lot of families just can't afford to do that. So that's just another um, struggle with people who already having a hard time putting food on the table. And it's just really unfortunate that that had to happen to a lot of families. And on this next slide here, we have two different graphs up on the screen. The graph on the left is showing the food insecurities in the United States from 2001 to April 2020. And as you can see in the earlier years, it was at a steady pace. And then in 2008, it went up a little bit. But then towards the end, here you can see that the numbers jump up by quite a significant amount. And that was at the start of the pandemic. And then the graph on the right is from the COVID impact survey and the survey of mothers with young children. And by the end of April, you can see here that more than 1 in 5 households in the United States and 2 in 5 households with mothers with children 12 and under were food insecure, and almost 1 in 5 households of mothers with children aged 12 and under, um, their children were experiencing food insecurities. Depression and substance abuse. A new survey found students had experienced higher rates of depression when the pandemic first began and when schools were getting shut down. As seen in the chart below, depression among college students in March through May of 2020 was at a 40.9% compared to fall of 2019, which was at 35.7%. And for substance abuse, it had decreased in 2020 compared to 2019. Struggles of remote learning. Schooling provides essential learning, and when schools are closed, children and youth are deprived opportunities for growth and development. The disadvantages are worse for underprivileged learners who tend to have fewer educational opportunities beyond school. And not everyone has access to things like Wi Fi, computers, or printers. So, that makes it a lot harder for the remote learning aspects of school. And if you don't have any of those things, you don't always know how to use them also. So that it's just another challenge to try to get a grasp on just to attend school online. And it can be difficult for students to concentrate and be engaged with their school. When you're at home, there are a lot more distractions, and it's easier to get off task. And staring at a computer for so long can be very hard for certain students. And according to the Los Angeles Unified School District, they reported that 12.5% of high schoolers in their districts had not yet checked into their school's online platforms, and that approximately 33% were not participating in online learning. Safe space. Students are in unsafe places. While many students may be happy to reconnect with family again, some have returned to abusive households, others to an empty fridge, and others to no home at all. Data shows that reports of child abuse around the nation have plunged during COVID-19 and the lockdowns. 43 states found that reports of abuse and neglect in April 2020 dropped by an average of 40.6% in each state from the levels reported in the same month of 2019. Experts predict that the drop in the reporting when COVID-19 was declared, noting that school closures kept children out of the view of adults and teachers who make up a fifth of all child abuse reports. Um, so when the kids aren't in school, like no one really gets a good look at them, or can keep an eye on them and see if they have changed at all. Teachers notice a lot of things, and when they're not there, it's a lot harder to report when it looks like a child is being neglected or abused. And during the first 2 months of the lockdown, pediatricians across the country reported treating more severe injuries caused by abuse, along with an increase of fatalities.
Just as students are impacted by the pandemic, parents are feeling the effects of COVID 19 as well. COVID 19 changed all of our lives in unprecedented ways, and this change can cause long term psychological effects that can be detrimental for a lot of people. Being a parent with a child in school can already be a challenge, but now with the responsibility of becoming your child's teacher, that role is even more demanding. From the first part of the day to the last, parents are constantly juggling home life, work life, and school life. According to the census.gov website, it is stated that in the United States, around 1 in 5, or 19.6%, of working age adults said the reason they're not working is because COVID-19 disrupted their childcare arrangements. While dealing with this already challenging economic and social disruption from the pandemic, many are also juggling to adapt to their new household schedule of homeschooling their children. Households without a guardian at home often face many limitations from their employers. Those who do not have the ability to work from home or take leave are forced to use their unpaid time off, quit, or minimize their work hours to care for their children full time. As you can see in this chart, adults ages 25 to 44 are the ones who are largely losing their jobs due to childcare issues. And moreover, you can see that this is also disproportionately affecting women. Parents are battling psychological effects such as stress, anxiety, and depression. COVID 19 has taken away all the supports they can usually depend on to combat these issues, such as childcare and spending time with family and friends. The pandemic has created an indescribable amount of grief, loss, and devastation, in addition to an even busier household with the children now at home. In a Stress America poll released in May of 2020, the American Psychological Association noted that parents are more likely than those who are not parents to say that basic needs such as access to food and housing are a significant source of stress. Other significant stressors for parents include access to healthcare, missing major milestones like weddings and graduation ceremonies, and 7 in 10 say managing distance and online learning for their children is also a significant source of stress. The study also found an increased risk of mental health issues for marginalized individuals whose pandemic parenting woes are now intensified by unrelenting racial disparities. When the pandemic forced schools, daycares, and preschools to close across the country, the stress of childcare and schooling fell upon millions of parents who feel they must choose between their jobs and their children, some finding it nearly impossible to work from home while supervising and teaching their kids. Both mothers and fathers feel that being a parent is a strike against them in the workplace during the pandemic. Both mothers and fathers fear taking advantage of parental benefits that are offered. 4 in 10 parents say they have less job security due to the pandemic and fear being penalized because they have childcare responsibilities. Parents are concerned that they're not currently performing to the best of their abilities and that COVID 19 is going to affect their job security and their career growth. 4 in 10 parents also fear it would be a risk to their employment to take advantage of benefits that their workplace offers to working parents, and over a third worry that they'll be terminated if they do so. We had the privilege of interviewing one of our teammates who is a working mother of three. Her children are in pre-K, first, and sixth grade and are currently in a hybrid model of online and in-person schooling. She let me know that she is primarily responsible for their schooling while she's working from home, and she describes this as stressful. Between managing pushback from my kids and working full time, I feel physically and mentally drained. Our normal routines and schedules have been completely uprooted, and the kids and I feel restless being inside so much. I've had to learn new systems and new technologies, and I worry that my kids are not learning properly or are possibly failing. I feel depressed and I feel like a failure. Research has shown that in many families, moms are more often the ones to supervise a child's virtual education, and we saw that firsthand in our interview. A majority of mothers say they are primarily responsible for managing the child care tasks throughout the work week, doing things like preparing meals, supervising homework, and monitoring playtime. Mothers feel more guilt in attempting to meet the work life demands and experience more feelings of anxiety. Our nation's teachers are a category dominated 3 to 1 by women. So teachers who are women and who are parents experience this dynamic 2 times over, instructing their own students virtually while also working as the primary parent to ensure that their own children don't fall behind in their distance learning.
The mental health of teachers has been affected by the pandemic as well. Last August, the National Education Association, a major teachers union, found that 28% of educators said the pandemic made them more likely to leave teaching. A study from Louisiana tracked early childhood educators' mental health last spring, finding that rates of depression almost doubled, with more than a third of those educators indicating depressive symptoms. In a survey from August to September by the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, the vast majority of teachers reported working longer hours, and only a quarter said that their school offered adequate support for mental health. What better way to find out about teachers and school administrators' concerns than by asking our local educators directly? In early February of 2021, we conducted 2 interviews by email with Washington State teachers Connie Shines and Allison Dashbach. Connie Shines is a teacher in an urban junior high school in Tacoma, Washington. She is currently using a virtual format to teach remotely from her computer and anticipates that by March 2021, she will be using a hybrid model, teaching partly with virtual format and partly with students attending school. Connie admits that she is an optimist and sees the glass half full. Allison is the assistant principal of East Valley Middle School in Spokane. Allison's school went virtual in March of 2020 and switched to a hybrid format in September of the same year. They are still operating in a hybrid format. We asked them the following questions.
Connie, what are the most emotionally challenging issues you are experiencing as an educator since you have altered your profession to adjust to COVID-19?
Working late into the evening, 9 or 10 at night, translating everything I know about good teaching into a virtual, two-dimensional format, usually PowerPoint. Some students have seemed to drop off the face of the proverbial earth. They don't come to class online at all, or when they do, they never participate. Not out loud, not in the chat, certainly not on camera. That is very disheartening to me. I want my students to succeed, and when I can't see them or speak to them individually, as it is not appropriate to have a one on one with a student virtually, I am at a loss for how to help them because I can't figure out what they really need or what would be the right approach.
Allison, what are some of the most emotionally challenging issues you are experiencing?
When we are unable to see students every day, we do not notice the changes they might exhibit, which indicate a potential problem or unsafe situation. We have had one student die by suicide and numerous other students experience mental health crises. As a leader, it is my job to lighten teachers' plates as much as I can to make their jobs easier. With all the new learning, new technology, and new ways of teaching, this year has been difficult. I see teachers really burning out of the profession and it breaks my heart.
Connie, have you seen changes in the way your students interact with you or others during virtual or in-person learning?
I have realized that several students in every classroom are mostly observers. They learn a lot by watching and listening to others in the class who do talk. In the virtual world, there is much less to observe from others, so the observers have lost a huge part of their learning experience. This may tamp down some disruptive behavior, but they also lose the beneficial feedback they get from others.
Allison, what type of changes have you observed?
Students are much less likely to share in class, less likely to work with their peers, and less likely to join in class discussions. Some of my staff have described class discussions to be like pulling teeth. Students are also not as engaged with their peers as they normally would be. This is true for both virtual and in person learning. However, it is notably worse for students who are participating in full time virtual learning.
Connie, can you reflect on how socioeconomic disparities have affected students' abilities to learn and be safe during this pandemic?
We can give students the devices to connect, but if they don't have decent Wi Fi, they are still disconnected. Internet should be a universal utility for all. There has also been a lot of talk about encouraging or requiring students to turn on the cameras, which would show their backgrounds. Some students may not want to show their home to others and shouldn't be forced to do so. Also, research shows that students should be graded on their ability to master the standards, not participation or good girl boy behaviors. Since we can see why they aren't doing or turning in work into a virtual world, teachers are inclined to give participation grades to encourage those who are participating to keep it up and punish those who aren't for not responding in class. We don't know what is holding students back and whether or not they can control that. Several students have tried to participate while in the car on the phone with a parent. It is totally unfair to grade them for that.
Allison, what are your thoughts on how socioeconomic disparities have affected students?
While learning at home, one of the best tips that we can give parents is to have their student have a dedicated learning space, a desk, a chair, in a quiet area. For students in lower social economic situations, this is not possible. Sometimes students do not have more than a corner of the couch to call their own space. Due to COVID, a lot of families have chosen to combine households, leading to multi generational living situations. This means that students are much less likely to have their own learning space. Access to reliable internet is also a barrier that hits low socioeconomic families. In terms of safety for students, if a parent is an essential worker and is working long hours outside of the home, that impacts the student's safety tremendously. Not only is the student unsupervised, at times through no fault of the family, but the chances of the student finding other students and making poor choices together is increased. Overall, this pandemic has been damaging to students academically, but also socially. I believe this social effect will play out to be much more damaging in the long run than the academic deficits. I think it is important to plan to devote more resources in the future toward early adolescent mental health support and resources for families.
Connie, what are the most emotionally rewarding events that you could identify in your job because of these adjustments?
What I can even list are all the new tech programs and teaching strategies I have learned over the past year. I feel like being forced to learn and use these programs has been a huge benefit for me and my students, regarding new ways to engage them and track their progress. I will continue to use many of these programs moving forward, even in the classroom. Also, I have felt more connected with some of my students since we live in the same neighborhood, and I see them around in a non school context. One even wrote me a kind note in chalk on the sidewalk because she knew that was my usual walking route.
Allison, what were some of the most rewarding events for you?
Seeing my teachers succeed while using new technology has been rewarding. I have also seen an increased collaboration among staff, both within content teams and outside of content teams. I have also spoken to a lot of families, and that has been emotionally rewarding as well. Helping families in any way that we can is a priority, and I am happy when we can make that happen.
Everyone has an opinion about what teachers do, and teachers have their own set of professional and personal expectations. If you or someone in your family is suffering from anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues, you can always reach out to your primary care provider and local health jurisdiction for help. They may refer you to a local mental health professional for assessment and services. This professional could then schedule counseling sessions that could be done over the telephone or virtually. The Washington State Department of Health has a variety of mental health and other resources, as shown in this slide and the next slide. Prioritizing self care is important. Keep yourself busy. Making a puzzle, painting, playing an instrument, or anything to help keep your mind occupied can help. Stay connected. Check in with people remotely by using the technologies such as FaceTime, WhatsApp, and Skype. Calm your mind. Listen to meditations, natural playlists, and relaxing songs. Let your mind just be for a while with no distractions. Possibly download the Calm app. It's free for teachers. Lastly, for some, reducing screen time and media exposure is helpful. The news and social media can be overwhelming. Sometimes disconnecting can be your best option. Here we have our presentation references on this and the following 2 slides. Thanks so much for listening to this Team Saddle North Nirvana presentation. And remember, it's okay not to be okay.